Bang ding ding, trademark. He come out 6'7" tall. Bang ding ding, one is star. Bang dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding. It is a perfect day.
Woke up to the sound of the garbage truck again. Upstairs neighbor's toilet's leaking on my head. Cars broke down, I missed the bus, there runs a 10. I had a feeling this was a day to stay in bed. I finally left my pad right under Jumbo's cloud roof. A police officer pulled out his gun and said, I said, sir, you got the wrong guy. I guess it's just the perfect day. It's just the perfect day. Na, 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 na,
Hey there, and welcome back to Eggs. Today's special guest is former iHeart Radio program director turned full-stack developer, Zac Wellsandt. Zac is a Seattle-based developer who, after 15 years in the radio business, decided to take his expertise and pivot to a new field altogether. With a history of thriving in a fast-paced, collaborative, and creative environment, Zac decided to blend his passion for setting and meeting user expectations with building purpose-driven software. Now, he is a full-stack developer focused on front-end development using technologies like React, Typescript, JavaScript, CSS, and more. Here today to talk about his past in radio, his present in software development, deciding when and how to make and follow through with career pivots, and so much more. Please join us in welcoming to the show, Zac Wellsandt. Hey, Zac, how are you, man?
I'm good. Thank you. That intro makes me feel like we're all set. We're done. I think that was everything.
That's really nice. We'll see you next time.
Coming on.
Awesome. Thanks.
If you can send us a headshot or something, that'd be great.
Perfect.
No. So anyway, but welcome to the show. We're thrilled to death to have you. It sounds like, I don't have the same background as you guys do, but it sounds like you and Mike know each other, or at least have some peripheral relationship. So maybe we can just sort of start there, how you guys got to know each other and how this came about.
Yeah. So I'd worked in radio for quite a while and was doing radio in Seattle at Moving 92.5 at one point. This was 10 plus years ago. And I believe we have mutual friends like Scott Dolan and some other DJs that are in town. You know, it's that one of those types of communities where you start to get to know everybody and make those relationships so that everybody can stay fed and working and things like that. So we have those interactions, although not, I think, directly ever.
Yeah, I don't think we ever even met in person.
Yeah.
I knew you were affiliated with Moving, and so I added you on Instagram. And then a week or two ago, you posted something about pivoting careers, and I thought that was interesting how you switched from radio to the tech world. And so I hit you up to see if you might want to be a guest on the show. But before we go down the tech road, I have one question that has to be answered. Tell us about your dangerous scooter gang.
It's exactly what you described. No, it's not. Well, the only danger is how we ride like idiots a lot of times and do dumb things. That's the only danger, not to anybody else. It's just a bunch of nerdy folk that like to ride scooters and never take themselves seriously and wear animal helmets and, bar crash things and I don't know, have a lot of fun. We actually have a documentary, if you don't mind me plugging it. I'll
Sure, yeah.
That. If you want to see the ridiculous that is this, hop on Amazon Prime and search for Slow Ride Home. It's just over an hour or so documentary where they ride scooters all the way from Florida to Seattle in 11 days, 37
That's amazing.
miles. It's wild. And it's just a bunch of dumb fun. So yeah,
we have
check that out if you're bored.
Another DJ friend that came on the show, Chase 1-2 from Salt Lake. He has a weekly radio show called The Slow Walk Home. So,
similar.
Yeah, there you go. Anyways, tell us about getting into radio initially. Like that's a field that not a lot of people get to participate in, and it's got its ups and downs. You want to kind of break that down for us?
Yeah, for sure. Even less people nowadays, probably. It's an interesting world. So I started as a DJ. I started when I was in high school. We had the DJ that I had hired because I was involved with student body, whatever at the time. I'd hired a DJ. He flaked out like 2 days before and I couldn't find anybody else to do it. And I'm 17 at the time. So I was like, well, guess I'll bring my laptop and Winamp up to the dance and I'll just do that for everybody. I was 17 and it wasn't the worst thing in the world. I'm sure. I mean, if we heard it today, we would just be like, what are you doing, kid? But at the time, people were happy enough. And I'm like, maybe I can get into this. So I did. I bought some turntables with a friend, got to DJing, did that for a few years. And I was playing bars and doing pretty well in my town. I grew up in Spokane, Washington. So smaller, but still not, totally tiny. And yeah, it was going well. And I thought to myself, well, I can either buy radio ads to increase my reach, or I could try to work in radio and get that advertisement and get paid at the same time. And so I did. I weaseled my way into an internship. I kind of had to fake it a little bit because I just dropped out of college and you had to be enrolled in college. So I went and got it signed by the instructor and then got the job and then never turned it in and paid for the credits. So yeah, I got hired on just before they caught me and nice. Worked like wild for years, just trying to climb the ladder. You try to climb in radio by elevating the position that you're in your local market. And then at a certain point, you kind of have to leave the city and go to a bigger city, and you kind of keep climbing the ladder in radio in such a way. So it's all right. You had some success in this city. Let's move to this bigger city with more, with a bigger station, more listeners, more revenue and things like that. Move on to the next one, et cetera. So I did that for 15 years.
And you did that all the way from Spokane to Seattle to Houston to
not Houston, but Austin. So Austin, okay. It went like this. It went Spokane to Seattle, back to Spokane to run my first station, which went well. Then I got hired by iHeart and they moved me out to Grand Rapids, Michigan, which was actually fantastic and I really enjoyed, but 2 winters was enough. They called me and said, hey, do you want to move to Austin, Texas? I said, yeah, today? Absolutely. Because it was snowing in April and I'm like, get me out of here. So I moved down to Austin where I oversaw 8 stations between 2 cities, which was pretty wild. So that was 4 in Austin, Texas. And then I was running 4 or overseeing 4 down in San Antonio as well. So those were pretty big markets. And I kept finding success, right? Like I'd get to a station, I'd get the ratings up and the revenue up and they'd be like, hey, good job. Let's move you again. And so I kind of was like a fixer of sorts. And I enjoyed it. It was adventure. I came from Spokane, Washington. I never thought I'd leave that town, right? A lot of people don't. It's kind of like a black hole like that.
It's kind of like Pocatello, Idaho.
Yeah,
it's exactly. Very similar actually to our hometown Pocatello. Well, my hometown Pocatello.
Yeah.
So I was like, all right, well, I'm going to ride this out and climb the corporate ladder. And I thought, that was the move for me. And I was finding success. And it's interesting. I think what's funny with radio is because it is hard to get into and it's hard to find success in. There's almost this like survivor's guilt when you climb the ladder a little bit, in that I would hear people complaining about radio and not making any money. And I didn't make a lot of money. I didn't make any money for a lot of years. DJing supported my radio habit is what I said for a long time, So once I did find success and a very good salary in that industry, I felt like I couldn't leave and I felt like I was trapped. I felt like, okay, this is all I know. I didn't go to college. I didn't do all these other things. I don't have a degree. I have to keep writing this out. The problem is the stress was getting higher and higher and higher. And when you're looking at that ladder that you're trying to climb in an industry or with a corporation, and you're like, if I just get to that next rung, right? If I get to that next one, things are going to be good. Things are going to chill. I'm going to get to breathe. I'm going to have more staff, more budget, things like that. The next one's the golden rung. And it wasn't, never was. It was the dangling carrot that they had in front of you the whole time. And I just had to have the realization one day that yes, I found success. Yes, I was doing well, but I was so miserable and I can't stand this. So I was dating a woman at the time that had pivoted from being a barista and a stylist working in fashion to working in tech because she had gone to a boot camp and she was working at Microsoft while we were dating. And we were working on a side project one day because I had always kept some nerdness in my back pocket. It's how I got into radio, actually, was making the best MySpace layout they ever saw. So I'm dating myself on that. And so we were working on a project. I had an idea for some software for radio for the industry. And she goes, why don't you do this? Like just out of nowhere, like I'm over her shoulder, like backseat driving. And she just kind of turns slowly and looks at me and is like, why don't you do this? you can do this.
She was
And
probably just annoyed with helping you.
Yeah. And I had that moment of, oh, I can do other things. Like I should figure something out. And so I researched the boot camp she went to. I researched a couple others and decided to land on the one that she had, mostly because the proof was there, right? Her and all of her classmates all had jobs with big companies making six figures and stuff. And I went, well, okay, this seems like a pretty surefire bet. So I did. I went into work. I was pretty miserable. We had a really rough time. I had moved back to Seattle at this point. I forgot to mention that part. And I knew I was walking into a really tough situation, and it was just as tough as I had figured. And I'd gotten really sick at one point, and things didn't go over well when I came back, which was just never sat well with me. They basically came back and I came back and they shamed me for being out, for being sick for about a month. And it's like, man, it was a life-changing moment for me. That illness was not easy. So I didn't take that very well, plus all of this stuff. And I'm like, all right, I think it's actually time. And I told him, I said, hey, I want out. And he's like, what do you mean you want out of your contract so you can find another job? I said, no. Like I want out, all the way out. And that was with my mentor, who you probably actually know, Mike. I'm going to leave the name out on it, but he, I'd known him for 15 years in the industry. And I said, I want all the way out. And you could just see it wash over his face. Like, wow.
Yeah.
Like that's how stressful that industry becomes. Something that I'd found so much success with just wasn't for me anymore. And so we worked it out. They essentially let me go without cause, which means that I got my severance out of it, which was fantastic. And that was a big moment, and a huge thank you to them for that, because they could have really hosed me on that if they wanted to. But yeah, so that at least ended on that positive note, which meant that I could go back to school. So I literally have the conversation with them on like Monday and Tuesday. My last day was the Friday. I started the pre-work for the course the following Monday, which was 40 hours worth of work. And then I started the course the Monday after that. So I had 1 week in between, but really that was filled. And it was an interesting moment of, okay, this is real. Like I did this. I quit my career that I was making very good money on. We're going to see what happens, So
before we leave radio world,
Sure.
because we're right at that edge of your story, can we talk about maybe some highlights in the radio industry?
Oh.
I know that there's got to be countless times that you met this person or that person. I've heard stories of some radio wars between Move-In and Kiss and stuff like that. Maybe throw out a couple of highlights from that.
Man, I mean, it was a real fun industry for a long time. And I came in at the tail end of radio's fun time, right? Like all the wild stories you heard about radio were pretty much wrapped up by the time I got there, due to FCC things and laws and revenue and corporations and just a whole lot of things. It just changed. So for me, I mean, there were so many highlights. I got to meet, if you can name a big artist, I probably met them over the years. When I was DJing and working in radio, I was getting to open for every hip hop artist that came through Spokane at the NIT. So that was always a highlight, getting to open for some of these best celebrities ever. Meeting George Clinton backstage one time when I'm setting up my turntables, and he comes walking by me in his swishy pants and his Tweety Bird shirt saying, "Hey, DJ, you going to play tonight?" And I'm like, absolutely, when you're done, but please take your time. And, just enjoying those little moments that you just can't replace,
Yeah.
Some other big ones, like I got to go to Macklemore's album release, preview for the Unruly Mess I Made. And that was at Safeco at the time. So T-Mobile Park, where the Mariners play. And we got to take batting practice on the field, and they announced you, and they had the big screen with your name on it, and just some of those things. And then I got to listen to his music in the Mariners press room, before it came out. Like little moments like that you can't replicate. Like that'll never happen again in my life. And just wonderful things. Work-wise, I did a promotion when I was in Austin, Texas, called Kiss a Kia, that we had listeners. It's old school radio where you have listeners with their lips on a car or having to touch the car, for hours and hours and hours. Basically, last one off wins. And we capped it at 50 hours, thanks to lawyers. But I had put a little bit of a twist on it, and we had streamed it live on the internet. So we streamed it. That was right when Facebook Live had come out. So that was such a big deal. And, they were promoting the heck out of it. So I'm like, hey, how can I get more people to pay attention to this? We ended up going very viral with that because the local Fox News affiliate had picked it up and put it on their Facebook, and then all their other TV stations around the country started putting it on their Facebook. So we had millions and millions and millions of people watching, which turned into being on Good Morning America, The Today Show, and just pretty much every national morning TV show you could think of ended up doing something with us. We did like a 3.5 minute back and forth with our morning show host on GMA, which was just mind blowing. Not to sour that story, but just to give you a little bit of a hint before we talk about the industry that I'm really enjoying now, not a single thank you from the company. No good job.
Yeah.
No, nothing. We were on national television with a promotion with my local station with our logos splashed all over the country, articles being written, all these things, and corporate, not a single person up my chain reached out and said, good job.
Wow.
Nothing. So
yeah, no, I think it's interesting. Both Mike and I have a little expertise or a little experience in like the music industry, which I think is sort of, the kissing cousin to radio.
Sure.
And it's funny. It seems that there's a lot of advantage taken because of the nature of how cool the work is.
Absolutely.
Right. Because of the perk of you get to meet so-and-so, or because you get to do these promotions, or because you do these things. I think they're a little bit accustomed to not really having to, say thanks or feeling like they don't need to say thanks because look at the opportunity we gave you. Right. I mean, you should be thanking us. Like we allowed you to do this cool thing. You got to meet that cool guy because of us, it's kind of a backward dynamic. And, but I've noticed that in the music business and everything, it's like, oh, well, we'll give you tickets for 90 hours of work.
Right.
Or whatever.
And when you're young, you're like, hey, this is awesome.
And it's awesome. Yeah. I mean, exactly what you're saying. It was so cool. And it's such an awesome thing to be a part of. But, if you really factored in what it would cost to pay somebody, they're actually just taking advantage of it.
Absolutely. And,
it's a value thing, right? If it's fair, then it's fair. And if you like your tickets and it was worth it and you're happy, then it's all good. It's not, I guess, advantage taken. But at the same time, especially in a professional career like radio, it seems like you see that a lot.
There's a lot of times where that's totally acceptable and cool. And if you're cool with that contract and whatever, then fine. I mean, there's plenty of DJs out there that play for bar tabs, right? Like we've all been through that, and it's frustrating for everybody around them. But hey, if that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do, and that's where you value your work. Cool. Yeah, I hit a wall with that industry where I just, that was a big moment for me where I went, okay, like we did something very big, something that's never happened. I couldn't think of any of my bosses that had made it on those national TV shows, not to sound like a jerk, but it's like, not even a thank you, a text, an email, like something. Like I didn't even need money, like not even a bonus or anything, which really is something that you would talk about in that situation in a lot of ways, right? Especially if you're working for a promotion team or something like that. But instead it was just nothing. You did your job.
It seems
what do you want?
That's just a leadership fail more than anything, right?
Yeah. So yeah.
I did want to ask you though. So you'd been in the industry for 15 years. Can I ask how old you were at the time you decided to make this pivot? I was 35. 35. Okay. And the reason I'm asking, and this is a topic that's come up before, so Mike's probably rolling his eyes at me right now, but I'm particularly interested in this idea of this pivot, right? Because for me, I've had some interest in pivoting myself after being in the same career for about 20 years now. Mm-hmm. And, I've never actually done the move, but it seems like it's almost part of life, right? That there is this career change somewhere midstream, just the person we were when we started work at 17, 18 isn't the person we are at 30, 40, whatever.
Sure.
And so I wonder if there was any insights or anything you gained. I mean, obviously you'd hit a wall in radio, but there are plenty of people who hit walls and then just drag themselves to work miserable every day.
Totally.
And so was there any, I guess, can you point to any insights or any particular thing, that was the driving factor that actually made it possible for you to just be done? I mean, you mentioned the experience that you had, but I mean, like, is there something sort of internally where it wasn't about money anymore? It wasn't about whatever, but I needed this thing to be happy, and that allowed me to pursue it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it was. There were so many things. And again, like I could go on this list of negative things that bothered me or whatever. But I also, looking inward, didn't like who I had become in a way, right? My entire identity was wrapped up in that job, in that industry, which is even scarier when you feel like that industry's shaky or becoming less relevant. And so you're kind of thinking, oh no, where is this headed? That's part of it. I had seen it I had missed, I don't know how many family events. I was all over the country, so I couldn't get home to see people. It ruined or the way I was handling the stress in the job absolutely wore down a relationship that I had been in for 6 years. And that was heartbreaking. I didn't understand it until months after we had broken up, and I had the realization of what had really happened. Because I was just upset and stressed out and working 24 hours a day. Like my shields were up 24/7. That industry, trust in other people is not always there. And I felt like I was always under attack. So when I got home, it's hard to drop those walls that you've built up around you, especially when that work follows you home. I was working 12 and 15-hour days constantly, multiple times a week. And there was just a point where I went, I am miserable. The success isn't worth it. I need to find something else to do. And there's definitely a big anti-corporate streak in me too, that was like, do I want to keep working for somebody who doesn't even care or acknowledge anything I do, et cetera? I'm the typical millennial where I need a pat on the back every once in a while. You know what I mean? And I felt like I wasn't really getting that anymore. And I was just done. And fortunately, I'd met somebody that at the time just had the correct thing to say to me at the correct moment. And that was the real pushover. When she looked at me and said, you could do this, that was what I needed, was just somebody to go, hey, don't worry about all your experience and time in this one industry. Like, you can do other things. And I think that's the big thing I'm seeing with radio people right now that are unfortunately getting laid off just left and right. It is a bloodbath out there right now in the industry. It was already bad. They were already going to do this, and then COVID hit, and they're like, well, we're just going to speed it up and do it all now. And you know what I mean? Like, use this as cover for the downsizing that needs to happen in the industry because of the revenue changes. Yeah. So, I think her telling me that and me hearing that I was worth more than just my experience in that industry, or the fact that like that industry and my experience in it, and that's just true for any industry, that experience we always feel like is so specific, but it's really not, right? Like the things that I learned and got good at in radio applies to tech. It applies to any other job that I really want to go for. I think in tech, it paid off in a lot of ways. Like I walked into tech with 15 years of professional corporate business experience. Do you know how many people graduate with CS degrees at 22 that have never had a job?
Yeah.
Like I can walk into any interview and have a great conversation with a manager because I was a hiring manager for forever. Like I get the process they're going through, and I could have adult conversations, which actually came up in one of my interviews. Literally, the guy looks at me and he goes, "It's so nice to have an adult in the room right now." I said, "Well, I feel old, but yes, thank you." I was nervous about that because I was afraid, like, how am I, a 35-year-old, going to step into a industry that's known for young?
Yeah,
that
was actually one of the questions That was actually one of the questions I was going to ask you later on. Is ageism is real in the industry, and pivoting from radio into tech and being, in your midlife, that's got to be tough. Thinking like, am I going to be able to last in this? But obviously, it worked out for you. Can you tell us a little bit about General Assembly and about the boot camp you went through?
Yeah, absolutely. I very much enjoyed it. So I looked up a bunch. I mean, there's tons of boot camps out there. I ended up at General Assembly. They had a campus in downtown Seattle that wasn't too far from where I lived. It was in person at the time because it was pre-COVID, which I'm very thankful for because I need that environment. The teachers were great. It's pretty fast paced. So I took a 12-week course that was 8 hours a day, Monday through Friday, plus homework, typically 2 to 3 hours a night, plus then working on projects on the weekends as well. So I estimate I spent about 600 hours in that course in 12 weeks. Wow. So pretty heavy, pretty intense. Luckily, I, again, came from radio. So I'm going to take that experience of working 12 and 15-hour days. And that wasn't that stressful for me because I was just used to that crazy environment. The cool thing was I got to walk away from a job that I had kind of checked out in a certain way, right? I wasn't enjoying it. I was stressed out. I was angry. I wasn't learning and growing the way that I would enjoy. So going to boot camp was like somebody just turned my brain back on for the first time in years. Yeah. And it felt so good. It was so much fun. I was learning, growing, working with other people. Everybody's trying to make this huge life change. So the vibe is really pretty cool in the building for that. We learned front end and back end. It was a full stack course. And then they also have a outcomes professional that helps you. So that's helping you prepare resumes. It's helping you practice interviewing stuff, whiteboarding, behavioral questions, all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of, they're prepping you in that sense too, the whole time through the course. So you do that once or twice a week, I think, through the full 12 weeks, so that when you get to the end of it, you don't feel like, okay, now I got to start figuring out what I'm going to do. It's like, no, we've been prepping for this the whole time. And then they support you as you go through that. They get some connections sometimes where they can kind of throw you leads on things. And so I very much enjoyed that class, and I actually teach for them now on the side. So I work my full-time tech job, and then I teach in the evenings, because during COVID, I was so bored at home, and I have a single guy living alone. So it was like, well, I could play more video games, or I could make some extra money and teach. And I enjoy speaking. So, hey, let's do it. So yeah, it's been fantastic.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. One of the things you just mentioned that I kind of wanted to dig in a little bit on was, and for some reason it's an epiphany to me, is this idea of specific versus general expertise. I think that one of the things, just sort of, again, around this idea of pivoting careers, or the things that keep people from leaving a job that they're unhappy at, is exactly what you described. It's this thought or this thing in your head that the experience you've built up over the last X number of years in this company is hyper specific to that organization or that industry or whatever.
Right,
and not to say that it couldn't be in some respect, but there's definitely aspects of everything you do, that would translate. And so I wonder, I don't know if this is an easy question to answer or not, but I mean, could you cite a couple more examples of how the skills that you learned in radio have served you in this transition?
Yeah.
Just because I think as a role model, or as somebody, if we've got, let's say, somebody in our audience, lots of young entrepreneurs and stuff who are looking to maybe shift gears. Yeah, maybe even Mike here with his hand raised. Maybe that, because I guess I know this sounds stupid, but I guess it never occurred to me, right? So I come from an agency background, which is very similar to radio in terms of work schedules and that kind of stuff. And, but my concept of jumping ship or moving to another place, I was like, well, what do I do? I've been a designer for 20 years. How do I not be a designer now? Well, as you're saying that, I'm just sitting and replaying what you said in my head, and I'm going, well, shoot, but I've been running teams. I've been, contracting people. I know how to critique work. I know how to work with clients, and then I start going, oh, well, okay, well, those are applicable skills to almost anything. And so I just wonder if you'd share your experience on that a little bit more. I think it's an interesting point.
Yeah, I think I'm so glad you asked that question, because I think it's one of the most important things that I like to share with people. In fact, if you follow my Twitter, it's anytime you see big radio layoffs and things like that, you'll see me start kicking off threads of like, don't forget your value extends beyond this industry, and it will be appreciated and valued so much more in other industries a lot of times. In this case, going from radio to tech, I think there's a lot of translations you can do, right? You could say, instead of listeners, you can say users. So I was focused on building things for listeners to increase ratings and revenue. Well, now I'm building things that users enjoy that increases usage and revenue, right? Revenue is revenue. Listeners are users. There's just so many other things in the skill set wise, work ethic, that drive and passion to learn and grow and do better. There's a creative element, right? Because I came from the creative side of radio too, not just managing stations, but writing copy and coming up with new things and building things and having ideas. I absolutely use that in software engineering as well. Having work experience, being professional, interacting with clients. I mean, the list goes on and on. I think that we get hyper focused on, well, I know how to use Adobe Audition and NextGen. And it's like, okay, but that's you utilizing tools in your industry to get the job done. You probably also understand how to do other technical things, and you just don't look at it in the broader picture.
Can I ask you also to maybe just put that hiring manager hat back on? You said you worked in that role a little bit. You did some hiring at the stations. Can you put that hat back on and then just sort of speak as an employer, who might, my assumption, and I'm sure it's wrong, is that you might have to figure out how to spin your, expertise to make an employer understand how it's applicable, right? But from the managing or hiring perspective, can you think of ways that either people can better articulate the skill sets they've developed in other places and translate them into where they're trying to go? Or as a hiring manager, can you talk about, extracting that information or being able to make those connections in your own head?
Sure. I think the key here when we're talking about skills is there's hard skills and soft skills, right? So hard skills is like, I can program in this language, or I can use this software, or I could do these very specific hard tasks. But people don't hire for hard skills that much, especially in tech. Like, you've heard about the big rounds of interviews that they do and all this personality stuff and all these tell me about a time when type questions and things like that. Like, at least I know at the company that I work at, we hire people first. So soft skills is actually what we hire on. Hard skills are needed to a certain extent, but you can grow those hard skills a lot easier, and we can teach you the things that you need to teach, or you can learn while you're doing it. That's a very tech thing. We basically are professional Googlers. That's what we do. Mm-hmm. But soft skills is really what gets you hired. So as long as you've got those soft skills from your previous career, that's what I look for. And I do help a little bit with our hiring process at our current company, just because I have so much experience with doing the hire stuff. So I do a lot of our interviewing and things like that. And I don't even ask them technical questions if I'm not on the actual like paired programming section of our interview process. I'm asking purely soft skill stuff. Tell me about a time when something wasn't right and you decided to take action on it at work. Tell me about a time when your boss told you that we have to do A, but you knew that you really needed to do B. How did you work through that process with your boss? Or tell me about how you communicate when there's conflict between you and another employee. How do you work through that? Those are the types of skills that you can develop in any industry, right? All communication soft skills that transfer to any other industry. In fact, if you come in with really good communication skills and soft skills, you'll probably jump ahead in most industries that you step into, because almost everybody will complain that there's not enough communication in whatever industry it is. I think that those soft skills are super transferable. The hardest part, though, and this was hard for me too, and I kind of, again, had to weasel my way into the room with people, is getting past that application screening is so hard. And I think that's true across everything, really. And trying to get my resume pulled off the stack. That's where networking comes in. It's such a cheesy phrase and I hate it. And it was my least favorite part of the process. But getting to know people in the industry through meetups or friends of friends, asking around, do you know anybody else in the industry that you're trying to get into? Things like that is going to get you at least your resume pulled out of a stack. And if you can get on a phone call or get in a room, apply those soft skills. And that's I think.
Well, and I think it's twofold, right? I mean, when you're doing this in-person meeting or in meetups or online or however you're doing it, I mean, when you're doing this networking, I mean, essentially you are honing these soft skills, right? So if you've been in, let's say, a manufacturing position where you didn't really get to use your soft skills outside of being personable at break and on lunch or whatever, but the rest of the time you're just spent working, getting out and actually flexing those skills is probably a great place to go. So, I mean, even though people might be a little insecure, a little, less apt to go and start networking, I think you're right that it's absolutely critical. And it's funny because I do a lot of work with remote companies. So companies that hire people remote for remote positions. And, these guys will get 10,000 job applications from across the planet, that are applying for like a single position. And so your point about getting through that initial screening is, maybe the most important part, right? Yeah. Because they're going to use algorithms and software and things like that to cut off 9,500 of those. And then they're going to, look at the next 500 and start to break those down over a few different criteria too. So, I mean, if you already had a foot in the door, if you'd already had a conversation with somebody in the company, or if you've already, made a friend of a friend, you certainly would be a little better off. And I think it is important, even though it seems like a low tech approach to a high tech industry, the interpersonal relationships are still kind of the whole thing. Like that's sort of where it's all at.
And if it's tech we're talking about specifically, those interpersonal communication skills can sometimes lack in that industry, right? You've got to, depending on what type of tech you're working in. A lot of times you get some very intelligent people that just don't have the social skills or communication skills that you would have to have in other fields. So if you're coming in and you can communicate, you're an adult, you have a work ethic, et cetera, like those are the things that not only came up in my interviews, but more so come up in my reviews, which is a fantastic thing. And that was a really big aha moment for me, is when I had my first reviews 6 months in, all the feedback was entirely soft skills. And that was really, I think, a thing that can be inspiring for folks that are afraid of the technical side of things, is like, we don't even talk about that anymore. You're just expected to learn and grow and do what you need to do to get the job done. But what they really review you on and give you raises for, and where you find your success, comes from those soft skills. And so, that realization for me was like, hey, everybody that's exiting this industry, and I know how hard it is and how mentally tough it is, and you're concerned about your worth and your value and all these things, like, you can do that anywhere in any field. You just have to find the little, translation points, right? You got to find the Rosetta Stone, do the translations, and you'll find that success.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to ask you too, what do you think the balance is between sort of those soft skills versus the technical skills? And why I ask, at least in tech, or if we use your trajectory as a model, basically you had already developed many of these soft skills that now are helping you as a bonus. But to switch into technical work, you had to do this boot camp, right? And you went and you upskilled and you learned that technology, so that upskilling plus your, natural ability to communicate and life experience sort of all in one big mash made you a pretty desirable candidate, I would imagine. But like, let's say for somebody who hasn't wholly developed the soft skills, or who isn't totally ready to do that part, but they know they want to do tech. Like, I mean, would you say jump into taking these boot camps and getting started anyway, or should they be doing one of the other things first?
Yeah. What's cool about tech is it's not a boomer industry, right? It's a somewhat Gen X and millennial industry. You have people that are looking for, I think, a different approach and a different vibe to those things. So when it comes to hard skills and how to learn them, you don't have to go the degree route that you do in other traditional type of industries, right? You can, if you want to get a CS degree and go that route, that's totally cool and very desirable, and people will totally respond to that, but they don't hold you to it. Whereas I feel like a lot of places are like, oh, no college degree, get out. So what's nice with tech is you can either self-learn it, and I mean that you can entirely be self-taught if that is your mode of learning, and you want to learn everything on your own. I can't even describe the amount of resources on the internet that you can go through to do that, and largely for free. You could take a couple quick classes. Like I love attending reacttraining.com's sessions. I think they're fantastic. And that's like a $350 or $500, 8-hour session or whatever to really level up your skills. There's definitely ways to do that. Or in my opinion, I really enjoy boot camps. I like the pace. I knew some tech and I'd self-taught quite a bit, but I needed somebody to really get me caught back up, right? Because it had been 15 years before I really had worked on anything technical. And so it was like, all right, I know a lot's changed. Let me get caught back up to speed. So for me, the boot camp is the right formula, because it was 3 months. It was very intense, lots of knowledge, a lot of self-learning tied on top of it. I had instructors, I had classmates. I need to talk when I'm learning. I need to be able to have a conversation, share back with you what I heard so that I can make sure that I'm understanding what it is. So for me, that was my style of learning. So anybody that has that need, I think boot camps are a great solution. If you're like an amazing reader and you read for context really well and you can remember everything and read documentation and things like that, you might just do it on your own. It's totally up to you. I thought the boot camp fit the bill for me in a lot of ways. There was the timing of it, the cost of it, because I wasn't going to spend 4 years and Lord knows how much money to go to a traditional 4-year school. Wasn't going to happen at 35. 3 months and 15 grand sounded like a lot better deal to me.
Yeah.
And then,
Well, and I wanted to say too, just for the people who were technical first, right? So they wanted to do the boot camp because they're passionate about technology and maybe those soft skills aren't their thing. I think being thrown into an environment too, especially if you could do it in person, where you can develop a little camaraderie, a little spirit of teamwork, or, and start to, develop some brains that you have resources that you can talk to one another. Even if you're not ready for public speaking by the time you're done, you will have developed over the course of these 12 weeks or however long your course is, you'll have developed some friendships and relationships, and, maybe so-and-so gets recruited off to Adobe and you get to go along, or you can ask for a referral or whatever.
I still talk with,
you're working on both sides of that coin at the same time, even if it doesn't feel like that.
I still talk with several of my classmates to see where they're at these days. I know that if I ever wanted to look for another job, I've got a pretty good network of people now that I could go through. And the boot camp was a great source of that. My class was really small. My class was about 10 people at the time, but typically it's more like 20 people in a class. So I was kind of actually sad that we only had 10 people in the class, even though you get a little more instructor one-on-one time or whatever. Because to me, it was that whole concept of network building, right? Like, I know that they're going to land jobs and we're going to be able to reach out, and we've bonded over this experience, because it is a very, challenging experience, right? And you do bond over it. It's not trauma, right? Like, it's not trauma bonding, but it's close. It's in the trenches together, going through something really difficult, and everybody in that class, more or less, is making a life change. So you really do bond over that, Yeah.
Well, and it's sort of akin to working in a development department in a company as well. I mean, even though it's short term by design, the people you're working with, you're all trying to solve the same challenges, right? It's as if you were all working on the same piece of software together.
Yeah.
And so, everybody's learning the same thing. You're all going at the same pace, and some may have an advantage or a disadvantage or whatever, but together you can all do it. And so I think, the amount of things that you pull out of it, back to this point about soft skills, I think are probably, as valuable or equally as valuable as the technology that you're learning.
Yeah. And I think, the price tag, some people will balk at right away, right? It's $15,000 when I took it. I don't know what the cost is now, so please don't quote me on that. But I think I spent about 15 on it. That was scary for a minute. I ended up taking a private student loan out for it. And actually that's what connected Mike and I had made a post saying, hey, I finally paid off, or not finally, I paid off my student loan a year and a half early. And that was just a really big capstone moment. Like, hey, you knew that you had a problem in your life. You made a plan, you took action, you followed through on it. And look, you paid it off. Not only did you pay off your responsibility, you paid it off ahead of time because you're doing well. That was a really cool moment for me. And I had to take a pause and just kind of reflect on it a little bit of, wow, that was a major life change. And I feel like I've kind of like fully turned the page, right? I feel like I was in the middle of turning that page for, a good year and a half or whatever. And now I'm like, no, I'm in this. I did this. I feel good. I'm happy. I work for a company that appreciates me, that says thank you for things, let alone writes bonuses. And like, I had gotten COVID at one point, and they immediately hit me on Slack and were like, oh my God, what do you need? Can we send you groceries? Can we do this? Can we, it's just that moment of like, okay, you did it. You're around people that care about you. And it was just a really cool like moment of reflection of like, all right, like we can do this.
Yeah. That's really,
oh, go ahead, Mike.
That's really neat that they kind of embraced you like that coming out of boot camp. I know that, for me, I actually went down a tech route. I did the team treehouse. I did, the self-learning approach. And for me, I had so much, like the more I did it, the better I got at it, the more fluent in the languages I got at it. Sure. But I always had that self-doubt in the back of my head. Like, okay, am I going to get fluent enough in these languages where one of these companies is going to hire me with no tech background, no degree, no CS degree, and walk in and apply and get a job off the street just based off of my why did I just lose the word? It's the I lost the word. It's
But basically, would they hire you without the sort of technical degree versus, sort of, or maybe back to our soft skills conversation, would they hire you for who you are, not what you know?
It's GitHub repo.
Oh, there you go.
That's the word I was looking for. I couldn't space that. But that shows that you've put the effort in, right? You can see all the forks and work that you've done and show examples of stuff. But there's got to be that, okay, I just came out of 12 weeks of intense learning. There's still got to be some self-doubt in there. And then when you actually get the job, I mean, it's got to be like, okay, now what? You know, like, can I actually compete in this industry? Can I actually do what I need to do to keep this job? Can you maybe talk about coming out of the boot camp and going into your first few weeks, and then what it's like starting a career like this?
Yeah, that was actually the most difficult time. So I graduated. So I had left iHeart. I started the boot camp right away after, graduated 3 months later. So now we're into the first week of June or so in 2019. And again, I'd been going crazy, working my butt off for so many years with almost no vacations, no breaks. I took a little bit of time off just because it was summer in Seattle. My friends, I have a scooter. Like, I'm going to go have some fun, go on some adventures. We rode to Montana and back. You know, I did some of those things, and then I was looking for jobs. And that was actually a very difficult time for me because I had been working for so many years without pause that for the first time in, I don't know, gosh, almost 20 years, it's the first time I was unemployed. And I am not good at self-starting in the morning. If I don't have to be somewhere or be on a call or whatever, like if I wasn't meeting you guys at the time that I was meeting you guys at, I would have slept in today. Like, let's be honest.
Well, thank you for getting up.
Yeah. And so, you know, that's hard for me. Not having a clear direction and a clear focus and set needs and things like that. So that was very tough for me. And I'm trying to step into an industry, and imposter syndrome is kicking the whole time. And I think that's kind of the key of the things that you're asking, right? So imposter syndrome before you get the job, imposter syndrome after you get the job, that's real. So now I'm sitting in that office going, did I just trick them into hiring me? Like, did they make a mistake and hired me? I don't know if I would have hired me. Fortunately, I ended up with a team that just was fantastic, and it's a small company. They're wonderful. When I joined them, there was 21 people. We're up to 45 now. We're growing really, really quickly. We doubled up during the pandemic. And they were supportive in my growth, in my background, in my thoughts and ideas. Nobody ever shushed me or said, okay, junior, like, you don't know what you're doing. Nobody shamed me for being the old guy that's new at this in the room. Like, it was a very, very nurturing environment, but also still fast paced because we are a consulting company. So we are still building products for other big companies. And it's still fast paced, which I love because it just means learning. Like, I learned a whole new language my second week getting there because that's what I had to do. They said, do you know Typescript? I said, no. They go, you want to learn it?
You're about to.
Yep. Well, and other people that had worked there at the time said no on that project, who was also new and was also a junior. And she was like, no, I can't do all this. It's too many things. And I'm an idiot who sees a pile of glass and dives in head first with no helmet. You know what I mean? I'm like, hey, we got to do this. Let's do it. And so I had learned that and GraphQL and just getting to do my first, tech job at the same time, which was a lot. But man, I learned fast. I loved it. They took care of us. They reinforced all that. They give us a budget for education. That imposter syndrome is something that you work on internally, but it helps when your externals are nurturing you through that process, right? Yeah. Nobody at any point said I didn't know what I was doing. Nobody doubted me. Everybody said, you can learn this, you can do this. And that helps keep away that scary imposter syndrome, monster.
Well, that's the thing. I think that's such an interesting point because it's almost always just the voice in your head that's giving you a hard time. It's 100%. Nobody else. It's you keeping you from starting. It's not, yes. But it's the fear of somebody external saying something to you that actually keeps people from moving. So I think that's a great point.
It's hard for me to turn off that voice. It's been a thing for me forever. Even when I was successful in radio, I was like, should I have this job? Should I have these 8 stations that I oversee? And you have to remind yourself, yes, Zach, you've worked, at that time, 13 years to get here. You've had these successes. You can do this. And so switching whole industries, I mean, even getting to the choice, that imposter syndrome or that internal voice is the thing that you just got to kind of beat back and take that leap of faith in yourself, Yeah.
So what's a normal work week like now that you're kind of settled in and now that you've been there for a little bit? Do they keep you working on the same project, or do they kind of jump around, or is it pretty consistent?
So I work for a consulting company, so we build custom software for a bunch of different clients. Unfortunately, all my work is under NDA, so I can't be specific. But in the beginning, which I loved, I was jumping around between projects. They'd be like, hey, we need some help here, need some help here. And they would kind of give me some like easier stuff to work on. Like, hey, just go and restyle this and do some of the CSS that some of the like senior devs didn't want to do or whatever, because they were focused on like architecture, bigger picture stuff. And I'm like, hey, cool, let me hop in and complete tickets. I mean, I checked in code my first day at work, and that's a feeling that you just can't replace. It's just amazing. So I was doing that a lot. And again, those soft skills and that past of working in radio where I had to pivot every day 15 times, you know, when my PM was like, hey, can you pivot on this and go work on this? It was like, yep, absolutely. Close that window, open the new one, boot that one up and get going. That scored me a ton of points with my PM, right? Because again, the same person who didn't want to learn those other languages also didn't want to pivot. They'd complain constantly about having to stop what they're doing and working on something else. And I'm not saying it's frustrating, because it is, but you just kind of have to do those things nowadays. Because I've established myself a little bit more and learned about a lot more, and I get involved in the like upper level programming stuff a little bit more of the architectural type things. I am focused on one team and pretty much one project at this point. So I work my 40 hours a week ish. We're all remote at this point. They were really quick to send us home at the beginning of the pandemic. In fact, I asked because I had some health issues, and I said, hey, I don't want to work at home, but I might need to if my doctors say I should. They said, hey, you don't have to wait for your doctor. You can go and start working from home today. Take equipment, take some monitors, take, you know, whatever you need and go for it. So I'm still working from home. I can go into the office at this point, but they've realized nobody cares, right? Like, it's tech. So if you want to work from home, if you want to work remote, we ended up hiring all over the world because of it. So I do that from home. You're looking at my office space. It's in my house that I recently purchased, and this is my office. So that's awesome. I'm dressed a little nicer today than I usually am, just because I was going to be on with you guys, but usually it's the basketball shorts and a t-shirt. Work is,
I would have been overdressed for this crew. You'd have been just fine.
We do stand-up meetings every morning. So again, I love the communication. So we check in with our team, talk about what we're going to work on. And then from there, you just start working on it. We Zoom with each other all the time. We pair program together. We work together, even though it's remote constantly. And it's pretty chill, you know, a workout in the middle of the day. Like it's pretty easy going.
I imagine it was coming straight out of boot camp, getting hired, having maybe 5-6 months of in-office experience, and then going remote had to be kind of jumping in the deep end without a life jacket, you know. Can you maybe talk about? I was lucky
that I had those few months. Oh, so sorry. So I did have a few months in the office, which was great, and a lot of bonding time. And we had a really big project that we had to kind of push through and stuff. So that was fantastic. And I learned a lot quickly. And I'm very, very glad that happened. And I'm glad that my boot camp was in person too, just for my personality and learning type. But I mean, we're hiring people right now. Like one of my buddies at work got hired on, literally started the day before we sent everybody home. Wow. And it's his first tech job. And he had pivoted from, I think he was like a rock climbing manager of some places and set up walls around the country and stuff like that. So again, total weird pivot. But he's actually done pretty well with tools like Zoom and Slack. Like, it's nice to be able to walk over to the guy next to you or woman next to you and work through a problem and talk and whiteboard and stuff. But we live in a digital world. Zoom has been a great resource. Slack is phenomenal. I never feel like I'm out of touch with anybody. It's not bad working from home. It's other than my mental, if I like to be around people is tough, but like work wise, it's really not been too bad because Zoom is so easy to just hop on and screen share and do whatever you need to do. But yeah, it's been pretty good. And the company's super chill about it. I do miss the free lunch every day in the office, but you know.
I guess beggars can't be choosers, huh?
Yeah, right.
No, it is interesting. And I mean, we're starting to get to the end of this thing, but I wondered if you'd talk a little bit about sort of company culture and how you've seen a shift.
Yeah.
I mean, we've sort of talked about it a little bit throughout this conversation, sort of, you know, the little things, even just the not being thanked for this wildly popular radio promotion. But, you know, in the new company, maybe you are getting a little pat on the head because you bothered to learn a new language or because you're willing to raise a hand. But more than just that kind of thing, can you talk about the sort of cultural changes that you've observed in technology or any other experience that you have versus sort of, you know, maybe this older industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I think communication and thank yous is a big one. Again, like I joke, I'm a proud millennial. I know everybody loves to dog my generation. But I very much appreciate a lot of the things that we've brought into culture that we also get panned for all the time. So I think communication, I think things like gratitude and positive reinforcement. I know it's a crazy concept, but positive reinforcement goes a very long way, very long way.
Well, and it's funny that needs to be taught to people, right? I mean, like,
it absolutely
the old things, like just teach each other, or, you know, treat each other like you'd like to be treated, or these kinds of things, 100%. Right? I mean, it's not that complex, really.
Yeah, in radio, and especially in the large corporation I was working for, I felt like, I feel like I was a cog in the wheel or whatever, but also just like a tool for the job, right? Like, hey, we have this problem. We need to send him out there. Hopefully he fixes it. If not, he's gone. If he is, he's still gone. I think that industry was very like that. There was not a lot of extra consideration outside of, hey, here's your paycheck and you're expected to work until this thing works. Whereas in tech, and specifically the company I work at, and again, I'm very fortunate that it's a very small company and we have a very good culture. I don't feel like a line item. I don't feel like I'm just a tool to get the job done. I do feel like I am an individual that is appreciated and, I'll use the word, loved, right? Like we actually care about each other that we work with. Our Slack channel for our random stuff where we're just always sharing things from our lives or things we're doing or things we're going through or whatever is probably one of the more active Slack channels in the company, which I think really speaks to the cultural differences. Because it's constant communication and respect and encouragement and team building and all those things. I mean, again, the COVID story is a big one for me. You know, I didn't even tell the whole part. I had a buddy. We both caught COVID at the same time back in December of last year. I was being really careful. And then, you know, one thing happens and next thing you know, you've got COVID, which is extra frustrating at the point. But we both had it. He was still working in radio. I was in tech. He ended up coming and staying with me because he didn't want to give it to his girlfriend. And we both had it. So it's like, yeah, cool. Come crash on the couch or whatever. He worked every single day, crazy hours while having COVID from my apartment. And they were mad at him, more or less. My company, when I shared with them that I had COVID, like freaked out. They're like, are you okay? What can we do for you? What do you need? Take all the time you need. And not every tech company is going to be that way, but I do think that it's much more common in that industry. And I think that comes back to this like people's first attitude, right? Like we are about our employees and their lives and making sure they're taken care of, because that produces such great work, right? Like you're able to do these really complex, tough jobs of building software, which is just wild, because you don't have to stress about all those other things, right? Like you can just relax and work and feel good about it and be excited to go to work every day instead of dreading it, right? And I think that difference was it's so stark, right? It's such a crazy comparison of his experience and my experience while we literally had COVID at the same time from the same building. And the way we got treated different was just wild. So I share that story a lot. In fact, I share it while we're hiring. They're like, what's the culture like here? And I'm like, let me tell you about when I caught COVID, because that's such a moment, right? Because to them, they're going, crap, we could lose this guy for 3 months of work. It's a lot of money, you know?
Yeah.
And we have unlimited time off. And at the time we had unlimited sick time. They did dial that back a little bit, I think, just to protect themselves. Not that I think it would ever become an issue, but yeah, I think that difference is so crazy. And I think it's so important. And I wish other businesses and other industries would adopt some of that same mentality.
Yeah. And I think there's going to be more and more of that, right? We'll see as sort of the workforce evolves and the way people work evolves and all that kind of stuff. I think you'll start to see more and more of that kind of treatment, or Lord willing, anyway. I'm being optimistic here that you'll start to see more and more of it, because I mean, ultimately, if companies want to stay competitive, they're going to have to start competing on other fronts. And it's not just going to be the paycheck or, hours or, vacation time or whatever. There's going to be a lot of these other sort of touchy-feely parts too.
Yeah.
That, that make a person feel valued when they're working for a company. And that's so much of the job nowadays, right? I mean, if you're not satisfied with where you're working, it's probably costing the company money to employ you. So
absolutely,
I mean, it's actually better to try and find alignment on that front end.
I think, not to dog on previous generations. Okay. Maybe a little. I think that as newer generations who grew up with the things that we get made fun of all the time for, participation trophies and coddling or whatever, being told that we can be whatever we want to be. Like, I think as those people that grew up in those environments are getting to more leadership roles, I think that those things are going to start showing up in the workplace more and more, right? And tech is a younger industry, so you get more of that. I think Gen Z is going to come in and change it even more, because you think millennials are passionate about soft things and, being treated fairly and whatever. Gen Z will come and smack you upside the head about it. They're great about it. I love that they've entered our voting world and entering our workforce. And I think that some of those things are going to translate into better lives for a lot of people. It'll be frustrating for some people at the top sometimes as they're having to accommodate some of these things. But I think the best managers are going to pivot on that sooner than later. And there's a balance. You can't go over the top and lose all productivity. But I think we're learning, especially during the pandemic and especially in some of these newer, younger workforces, that like our concept of a harsh 40-hour work week and you're here to do a job and blah, 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 and that's all we care about. I think that's going to keep fading away a little bit. And I think it's super important, especially when you get into complex jobs and industries. If I would have had, I think, some of that same treatment when I was in radio, and there was a little bit of it, don't get me totally wrong, it wasn't totally cold the whole time. But I think if it had a lot of that same culture and you weren't fearing for your job every day and you felt loved and appreciated every day, I think the industry would have been a lot more chill. Who knows? Maybe I'd still be in it. I don't know. I craved those other things, and I'm very lucky that I found it at the company that I did on my first try too. I got really lucky. The first tech job I got after boot camp is somewhere that I really want to stay, So,
do you think that, did the boot camp help you land this job? And do you think that if you had done the self-taught approach, do you think you would have had it? Would they even look at your resume?
Well, it's kind of hard to say. My resume was a little bit different than somebody who pivoted with zero tech, because I had worked QA, quality assurance, for a video game company when I was real young. And I had also, my very first job was actually a paid internship building a full stack app for a school district. So on my resume, those were on there, even though they were like 15, 20 years old. And I just didn't put the dates on them so that hopefully the algorithm wouldn't push me out right away. That was my whole goal on it. Little shady-ish maybe, but I was always upfront about it when they asked about it when I got into my interviews and stuff. I think that the boot camp probably helps because at least it shows that you have some sort of traditional training. Again, it's not required, but if you have no experience, at least you have that. It's tough. I still think networking is the way. So like at the company that I'm at now, I don't know that I would have made it out of the pile if it weren't for the fact that one of the employees there went and asked about my applications because he's in my scooter club. So he had checked in and just said, hey, have you seen this resume from Zac by chance? Oh yeah, I don't know. He goes, well, just take a look at it and maybe send him the text screen, just see how he does. And I made sure that I was great on the phone with them. I built rapport as quick as I could. I did the text screen. I hit that one out of the park because all that resume stuff and whether you did boot camp or self-taught, all that falls away when you get to something like a tech screen, right? Can you do it? Can you do the technical job well enough that we think that you can be hired here? And I think that was a big turning point for me. So getting out of that pile is the hardest part. I don't know that any one line item's really going to get you out of the pile, which is why going back to networking is such a big deal, you know, whether you like it or not. Because I hated networking, but that's how I got to where I was, you know.
Yeah.
So.
I just am curious as someone who's been down the trying to self-teach path. And I feel that I could actually, if I got back into it and focused at it, that I could actually get a career in this industry, just because the amount of time and effort I spent trying to teach myself, I know that I could get down that road.
Yeah, I think that if you take what you've learned and walk into a boot camp, it'll be nice because the first few weeks, you'll probably be like, oh, I know this, like I get this, and I understand some core concepts. That's how I walked into boot camp. And I think you would absolutely, excel at that point. It is helpful. And then it helps you, like really drives you with the outcome stuff, and some resume help and some leads help and things like that. I think that goes a long way too, over doing the self-taught thing.
Yeah. I was just curious about their job placement, how that
Sure.
worked. So good to
So
know
it's,
that.
yeah, it's not placement. It's support. So they're helping you apply for those things. They're helping you because they want those numbers so that they can show, hey, 60% of our students are making X dollars after this much time after courses. They don't place you per se, but they do get leads and feed them to you, and they do help you go after those jobs. But if you're not doing the work, that's on you. And they'll tell you that. I absolutely loved my outcomes person. Alyssa was amazing. She was supportive. She was blunt. Like, well, Zach, how many interviews have you had this week? None. Well, how many meetups did you go to this week? None. Well, that's on you, bud. And that's the kind of like harsh, cold reality check that I love. Like, she was very blunt about it. And then once I started doing those things, she goes, look, you're getting interviews. Weird. And I'm like, yeah. I know. So, yeah.
Well, and I just would add a note too, that I know with a lot of these boot camps, there are several who sort of hang their hat on placement and things like that. Yeah. So that might even be a factor in choosing one, for example.
Totally.
Would be finding one that has either a really high rate of referral or maybe has a relationship with a company and they're actually recruiting for a company, for example, or whatever. So, I mean, there's a lot of different options out there, but I think all those are good points.
And some of them also tie their financial side of it to your success. So I did a traditional loan where I just had to pay a monthly loan or whatever that I had gone through a private bank on, but they also do at a lot of places. And I think GA still does. I missed the deadline for it by just a couple of days because I got into the process so quickly, but they will do delayed payment where you go through school, you do all your training, you start looking for jobs. They don't collect a penny from you until you land a job. I think it's like over 60K, et cetera. And it has to be a contract that's long enough or whatever. And then they take like a certain percentage for a year or two or something like that. It typically turns out to be a bit more money to do it that way, but they're also putting all the risk out there instead of you, which is kind of nice. Because if you don't get a job, from my understanding, and I would definitely say research it with whatever company or whatever boot camp you're looking at, but sometimes you're kind of off the hook unless you land one of those jobs. So that takes some of that fear side of the financials out of it for a lot of people. You pay for it on the back end a little bit more, but hey, if you're trying to pivot and you don't have, a bunch of money in the bank, let alone living expenses, because good luck trying to work during that time, and they do have part-time boot camps as well that are structured differently, so you can work during it. But if you can fully commit, I always say go for it. Just immerse yourself.
Well, we're about at that time. Zach, is there anything you want to close on? Any where can people find you if they want to reach out?
Yeah, I do have a personal, well, you can find me on LinkedIn, I guess. I try to avoid that website as much as possible unless I absolutely need it. I do have a portfolio site. It's not been touched since boot camp, but you can go to zacwellsandt.com. You can reach out to me through there. Always happy to chat with anybody if they want to reach out to me and talk about transitioning, because it feels good to talk to other people and see them believe in themselves. It sounds so corny. Believe in themselves and like take that leap, because it does matter. And you can do it, and it is important. And that's why I always try to share that story with people. And you'll see me on Twitter talking about it, especially in the radio community, of like, just don't hang your hat on your job. Like, your identity is not your job, and you're worth more than whatever company you're working for thinks you're worth. So take that leap, do it, trust in yourself, and just find your happiness, man.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and I mean, you say it sounds corny to say, believe in yourself and that kind of thing, because it does sound like the kind of information you would give a child or something.
Right.
The reality is that there are a lot of, 35 to 50-year-olds who are in careers they're not happy with, they're living lives they're not happy with, and, transition in one variety or another, whether it's work or life or whatever. I mean, the stuff that we're talking about here is applicable to any of that, really. And so I think it's really important to hear those stories of transition from people. And in fact, I mean, honestly, it could be a podcast on its own, just stories of people making this transition. Because I think especially with COVID, when people sort of discovered that the world was all up in the air and God knows what's next, the idea of transition became much more palatable. I think it became maybe more out of survival than anything.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it was, okay, it came to the forefront. Now I must think about transition because I've been laid off from my job, or I'm sick and I can't go to work, or I'm, whatever your situation is. So I think stories like yours are really inspirational. And, obviously, the hearing it over the course of, an hour in a podcast, it sounds like it went very smooth and pretty easy, but I think that it's good to sort of hear those stories of success, because I think that, honestly, anybody could probably transition and survive. Mm-hmm. This is a great country in that respect, and there's a lot of opportunity for a lot of people in that respect. And so I think hearing these stories, just sort of piles on for the individual, and you just never know. Maybe we'll hit the right set of ears today.
Yeah, and nothing makes me happier on that. That's why I say, if you want to reach out to me via my website, please do. Even if it's just you need a pep talk or, an inspirational coach to say, hey, just go do it. I won't charge for it. I just want to see people be happy and successful. And
at least not yet. We send enough people your way, and then you start running a bill.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'll set up a referral code with you.
Yeah, perfect.
So, anyway, well, cool. Well, thank you so much for your time, Zach. This has been awesome. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you all so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. And we'll see y'all next time.